This year, I have been talking about the US economy in terms of initial jobless claims. I've been doing this because of the work of two New York Federal Reserve economists, Braham and Dietz. Braham and Dietz published a paper on the 10th of April this year in which they argued that what was happening in the US economy this year was not a great recession, but in fact was similar to a great natural disaster. They based that view on the similarity of what was happening in the US initial jobless claims this year to what had happened during Hurricane Katrina. They pointed out that during Hurricane Katrina, there was a very rapid rise in initial jobless claims, and then a quite rapid decline over the following period. The decline was much more rapid than had occurred in the Great Recession. As months went by, it appeared that their theory as to what was happening proved to be correct. Initial jobless claims in the US peaked at 6.867 million in March 2020, and then had fallen to 884,000 by September. In spite of this continuous series of good news, the media greeted each number, even when there was only a moderate increase after a dramatic decline, as a sign of impending doom. I noticed an article on 23 April published in the Hill newspaper, which is a political newspaper published in Washington, D.C. This carried the headline, "Weekly jobless claims rise to 1.4 million, first increase since March." Then, in the article, they talked about how appalling the circumstance was. This was in spite of the fact that initial jobless claims were then less than a quarter of where they had started back in March. Then there was an article published by the BBC on 20 August 2020, titled, "Initial Jobless Claims Rise Back Above 1 Million." Again, this was a tale of woe. Then, more recently, in an article on the 10th of September 2020, NBC News published an article titled, "Initial Weekly Jobless Claims Total 884,000 versus 850,000 expected." At the end of their tale of doom, they finished with a commentary by a director of a research at a data provider, Nick Masing. And he said, and I quote, "The V-shaped recovery is a mirage. We are seeing a permanent reduction in the size of several sectors of the economy." And he said this in spite of the very strong V-shaped recovery then appeared to be in progress. There is actually a very strong leading relationship between US jobless claims and year-on-year growth of US GDP. Now, when I say year-on-year growth, I mean the level of GDP this quarter relative to the quarter a year ago. This year, there was a very sharp decline in the US economy. As late as the first quarter in US GDP, the US economy was still growing at a rate of 0.4%. By the June quarter, it had slumped to a growth rate of minus 9.1% year on year. A model based on initial jobless claims suggested a growth rate in the first quarter of 1.04%. That was pretty close to the actual growth rate of 0.4%. In the second quarter, it suggested a decline in output of between 11% and 5.7%. In fact, the actual number came at 9.1%, pretty much between the two. Now, after continued recovery and further falls in the initial jobless claims to 884,000, the model is suggesting that the current rate of decline of the US economy has improved from minus 9.1% in the second quarter to only a decline of 1.2% year on year now. And indeed, by the time we get to the end of the year, it suggests that year on year rate of decline will only be 20 basis points, 0.2 of 1%. The rapid decline in US jobless claims will be matched by a rapid recovery in the rate of growth in the US economy. We can see the evidence emerging that this is true. Growth in the third quarter is expected by the Atlanta Fed in the GDP Now publication to grow in the one quarter by an annualised 31.7%. In one quarter, the US economy is expected to rise by 7.9% in absolute terms. This will be the fastest rate of growth that the US economy has seen since the 1940s. The very rapid decline in initial jobless claims that we've seen in the US economy this year would suggest a very rapid V-shaped recovery. That V-shaped recovery is what is now occurring. Conclusion. Over recent months, a series of media articles has been published on how bad the US economy is based on US jobless claims. This has been in spite of the fact that there has been a rapid decline in US initial jobless claims from 6.86 million in March to 884,000 by September. When we build a model of year-on-year US GDP based on these initial claims, we expect the US economy to recover from a year-on-year decline of about 9% for the year to June to a decline of 1.2% in September and only 0.2% by the time we get to December. The recently published numbers for US initial jobless claims are not bad, they are merely misunderstood.